I get the distinct feeling that this show is actually trying to lower the intelligence of the audience. Or at the very least, it's doing an incredibly good job of making the main character far less intelligent. The number of stupid decisions that get resolved purely by plot convenience is incredible. It's not just that Boba Fett is no longer acting like Boba Fett, it's as if the writers are trying to make him look as dumb as possible in order to include scenes that exist for no reason other than nostalgia bait. And speaking of nostalgia bait, this episode is jam-packed full of it, because when the characters, the dialogue, the action scenes, the CGI, and everything else is garbage, the only trick left in the bag is nostalgia bait. The Book of Boba Fett is bad. Episode 4. Once again, this episode starts with Boba Fett having a little nappy time in the bacta tank. This is a flashback to when he first found Fennec after she was severely injured in the Mandalorian series. He instantly recognizes her as Master Assassin Fennec Shand, and as I mentioned in Episode 2 video, Boba Fett as a bounty hunter would have worked alongside assassins, so it makes very much sense that he would have been well aware of who this is and who his competition would be. And the show is now confirming exactly what I said previously. Why this is important? Because it makes it all the more stupid that Boba Fett was unable to recognize the S.H.I.E.L.D. guys from the Order of the Evening Flatulence. After all, Fennec Shand is a single person who usually wears a helmet to cover her face, and yet the Order of the Evening Flatulence is an entire group of people that all wear the same uniform.
Danny kind of forgot it.
But don't worry, it gets worse. Boba Fett takes Fennec to the only place that's nearby that could treat her wounds, and it happens to be one of the Clown Ranger cyber modification places. We get an interesting look at some of the clowns outside, who look even more ridiculous than the other ones we saw in the previous episode. But what's even dumber about this scene is that when Boba Fett goes inside, of course they are blaring techno music, and the entire sequence looks like it was ripped right out of a Matrix movie.
But why?
Because the writers on this series don't have an original thought between them. Boba Fett offers the guy a large amount of money for him to fix Fennec, and previously I've said that often practical effects will look better than CGI, but this scene is making me seriously doubt myself. This ridiculous arm looks like it was ripped right off of a Borg drone from Star Trek The Next Generation. Seriously, compare what we have in the show versus what we saw in Star Trek.
This is terrible.
Everything in this series is just recycled garbage. The show creators are so unoriginal, it's almost painful to watch. What's even dumber about this guy's arm is how absurdly large it is, and that it's very obvious that he just has his real arm inside of a fake one. The effort being put into this is lower than the ratings for the series. Fennec now has a whole bunch of machinery inside her torso, but at least it was able to keep her alive. Boba Fett takes her out to a camp in the desert where she eventually wakes up. He explains that he recognized her and saved her life because he needs her help in recovering his ship. She asks what happened to him since he was supposed to be dead, and Boba Fett responds that he was saved by the Tusken Raiders, and that they took him in and treated him like one of their own.
How dumb are you?
Which I have to point out is a great example of Stockholm Syndrome, because Boba Fett was not rescued by the Tuskens. He was captured while he was severely wounded, he was taken as a slave, he was starved and beaten, and he would have been worked to death in the desert, and the only reason why he didn't get Shmi Skywalkered along with the Rodian was because he managed to kill a big lizard thing and the Tuskens thought he would be useful. You absolute moron! And it gets dumber because this is where the corrupting garbage influence of the blue hair woke weirdos grabs hold. Boba Fett's ship is called the Slave One. That's what it's always been called, and that's what it will always be. However, Disney doesn't like using the S word because morons on Twitter will throw a fit. So Boba Fett instead refers to the ship as the Fire Spray. But I would like to remind you of two things. First, this is not Boba Fett. This is someone pretending to be a weakling version of Boba Fett. And second, Disney Star Wars is not canon. The ship is called the Slave One, whether the woke weirdos like it or not.
Is that a fact? That's a fact.
As we continue, Boba Fett explains that his ship is inside Jabba the Hutt's palace and it's now controlled by Bib Fortuna. Fennec asks why Boba Fett can't just go and get it since it rightfully belongs to him, and in a dramatic change of events, Boba Fett says something that actually makes sense. He believes that Bib Fortuna will simply say no and not allow Boba Fett to take the ship, and I can't believe I'm saying this, but yes, this actually makes sense, because it's been several years since Boba Fett was last seen. Most people believe that he's dead, and few people ever saw him without his helmet on. Bib Fortuna now has control of the entire area, so why would he be willing to give up an incredibly valuable ship to some stranger claiming to be Boba Fett? Boba Fett also mentions that if he approaches Bib Fortuna without his armor, he would be a lot less intimidating. But as we see him throughout this series, Boba Fett is a weak pushover, even when he has his armor, so I'm not sure that makes a whole lot of difference.
Gonna cry?
Fennec agrees to help recapture the ship, and then her debt is paid. The two head over to Jabba the Hutt's palace, where things get a lot dumber. They need to scout out the inside to see how many guards there are, and Fennec has the brilliant idea to use a stealth spy droid. Or at least this would have been a brilliant idea if it wasn't covered in bright red lights. This thing was designed for stealthy operations, to go into areas unseen, and yet the show creators thought it would be a good idea to cover this droid with incredibly bright red lights that can be seen from a mile away. This is the worst designed spy droid I have ever seen. Obviously, you could control this in such a way to avoid detection altogether from things like line of sight. However, there are going to be many situations where a droid like this would need to hide in the shadows, in a corner, or up near the ceiling. Making it so that the droid can easily be seen is incredibly stupid. But don't worry, it gets worse. Remember how in the last episode, Boba Fett was making kissy face noises to the Rancor? Well, he's doing it again, except this time it's for the Bantha, who he then releases into the wild. The droid returns and shows a map of Boba Fett's palace with a position of all the guards, but since there's too many, they decide that they need to sneak in. This, of course, is done in the dumbest way possible, because clearly the best way to stealthily sneak in is to run through a wide open area where they could easily be seen, making a lot of noise and splashing in puddles.
Congratulations. You're a failure.
Fennec then uses some sort of energy cutter on the metal bars and kicks them away, where they very loudly clang on the ground, making yet more noise. The plan was to stealthily sneak in, and yet these two bumbling idiots are making absolutely no attempt to actually sneak in. But it gets even dumber because for some bizarre reason, Fennec only cuts the top part of the metal bars, and since she didn't cut the bottom, kicking them would have done nothing. So either the people who built this palace simply forgot to sink the metal bars into the ground, or the writers forgot how metal works. In the next scene, we get some pointless nostalgia bait. As the two are moving under the palace, of course they're continuing to make noise, and this is heard by some of the droids in the kitchen. The cruel droid goes to inspect the noise, while the other droid calls for the rat catcher. Boba Fett comes out and knocks the cruel droid to the ground, which appears to destroy it. So now everyone that has been wondering what happened to this droid that only appeared for 10 seconds, now you know what happened. Isn't that wonderful? Utterly pointless nostalgia bait, but the scene isn't done yet, because the second droid has 6 arms, and of course, they make it behave exactly like General Grievous does when he has the lightsabers, except this is a kitchen droid, and instead of lightsabers, he just has knives. Isn't that funny?
It is a tale told by an idiot.
But Fennec just walks up behind the droid and destroys it with no effort at all. But then it gets even dumber because another droid arrives, and this is the rat catcher that they called for. It's small and it looks like a rabbit, and because Boba Fett is a joke of a character now, he spends the next 2 minutes chasing the small rabbit droid around the kitchen in a variety of stupid ways. They make it to the hangar where Boba Fett gets inside his ship, and after a long and very boring fight scene, both he and Fennec manage to open the doors and fly away. Boba Fett says he has some unfinished business and manages to find the hoverbike riders, whereupon he mercilessly blasts them into oblivion. We're halfway through the 4th episode, and this is the only time in the entire series where Boba Fett has actually behaved like Boba Fett. But of course, this fleeting moment is quickly gone, as Boba Fett then returns to being a complete and total moron. He wants to recover his armor, but for some astronomically stupid reason, he believes that it is still inside the Sarlacc pit.
Just when I think you couldn't possibly be any dumber.
He uses his ship and its lights to try to look down into the pit, only for the creature to reach out and grab the ship. Boba Fett tries to use the lasers, but he's too close to the ground, and he only hits the sand. This is when Fennec has to climb out of her seat to the back of the ship in order to launch one of the bombs. And why this release button is suddenly beyond the reach of the pilots is unknown, and it's also very dumb. But more importantly, this scene should not even be in the show, as it makes absolutely no sense at all. Boba Fett remembers quite clearly how he escaped from the pit. he knows with absolute certainty that he still had his armor on after he climbed out. Even if the memory was a little fuzzy when the Jawas were taking his equipment from him, he would still remember at least some of that. Furthermore, it makes absolutely no sense for him to think that he would have removed his own armor when he was in the pit. There is simply no logical reason why he would have done that. It's even mentioned that the only reason why he was able to survive the Sarlacc pit was because he was wearing his armor when he climbed out. This entire scenario is stupid beyond comprehension, but it gets even dumber because after the creature has been destroyed, Boba Fett insists on climbing down to search for his armor, which makes no fucking sense. Boba Fett knows that he was wearing the armor when he climbed out the first time. There was no reason for him to take it off while he was inside the Sarlacc pit. There is no reason for him to go down to check to see if it's still there. And even if, for some bizarre reason, he had left the armor in the Sarlacc pit, it would have been destroyed by the bomb that had just gone off. The only reason for this scene is pure nostalgia bait, because in terms of story, it is utterly nonsensical. But worse than that, the writers had to make Boba Fett extremely stupid in order for this scene to even happen. This show is garbage.
This is the worst!
Back in the present, Boba Fett wakes up from his final nappy time as he's told by the droid that he has now been fully healed by the Bacta tank. He heads over to the cantina in order to recruit the Wookiee. When he gets there, the Wookiee is in a fight with some of the lizard alien guys, and the manager comes out and gives us 2 minutes worth of painfully obvious exposition, talking about how much of an amazing fighter the Wookiee is, and that his energy knuckle things are even more feared than blasters.
Is he though?
And I would remind you that in the previous episode, this supposedly amazing fighter lost to a bunch of clown rangers. Also, I want to point out that this is a prime example of what bad writing looks like. It's using exposition as a crutch in order to describe what the character is so that the audience will simply believe it.
You can't just have your characters announce how they feel!
Despite the fact that we've never been shown that the Wookiee is actually good at anything. The only thing that we've seen from this Wookiee so far is getting his ass handed to him by a bunch of clown rangers. This Wookiee, so far in this series, just looks pathetic, and regardless of whatever the manager is trying to tell us through exposition, it doesn't matter. And this cantina scene makes the Wookiee look even worse because it isn't some grand battle, and the lizard guys weren't even trying to fight back, they were trying to get away. So all he did was surprise attack a bunch of lizard guys who weren't expecting a fight, and he managed to beat up a couple of them. That's not impressive. Of course, we do get a little bit more nostalgia bait here where the Wookiee ends up tearing the arm off of one of the lizard guys, but again, it's just nostalgia bait because that's the only trick that they have in the bag. Boba Fett then offers the Wookiee a job, which he accepts. The next scene is Boba Fett in a meeting with all the criminal leaders from the area, and he says that the Pike aliens are moving in, but all he wants from the other leaders is for them to remain neutral while he fights the Pike aliens. And the other leaders agree, which is either a very convenient way to simply write them out of the story, or they're going to end up betraying Boba Fett later on. The final scene has Boba Fett supplying Fennec with all the money she needs in order to hire more men to fight the Pike aliens. Each episode of this series has gotten gradually worse. Plot convenience to move the story along, with nostalgia bait to fill the gaps. And the whole time, it's been obliterating the character of Boba Fett. This series has no redeeming value whatsoever. But thankfully, that's the end of episode 4.